Tucker is back. He announced new plans to have a kind of Elon Musk Twitter crossover show. Let's take a look.
After more than 30 years in the middle of it, we could tell you stories. The best you can hope for in the news business at this point is the freedom to tell the fullest truth that you can. But there are always limits. And you know that if you bump up against those limits often enough, you will be fired for it. That's not a guess, it's guaranteed. Every person who works in English language media understands that. The rule of what you can't say defines everything. It's filthy, really, and it's utterly corrupting. You can't have a free society if people aren't allowed to say what they think is true. Speech is the fundamental prerequisite for democracy. That's why it's enshrined in the first of our constitutional amendments. Amazingly, as of tonight, there aren't many platforms left that allow free speech. The last big one remaining in the world, the only one, is Twitter, where we are now. Twitter has long served as the place where our national conversation incubates and develops. Twitter is not a partisan site. Everybody's allowed here, and we think that's a good thing. And yet, for the most part, the news that you see analyzed on Twitter comes from media organizations that are themselves thinly disguised propaganda outlets. You see it on cable news, you talk about it on Twitter. The result may feel like a debate, but actually the gatekeepers are still in charge. We think that's a bad system. We know exactly how it works, and we're sick of it. Starting soon, we'll be bringing a new version of the show we've been doing for the last 6.5 years to Twitter. We'll be bringing some other things too, which we'll tell you about. But for now, we're just grateful to be here. Free speech is the main right that you have. Without it, you have no others. See you soon.
Now, according to new reporting in Axios, Carlson's lawyers recently penned a letter to Fox accusing the company of fraud and breach of contract and demanding a host of documents that could precede legal action. Sources say Carlson was told by a Fox board member that he was ousted as part of Dominion's settlement and that Carlson intends to subpoena Fox communications chief Irina Briganti's cell records.
As of this taping, Carlson's video has 18.2 million views on Twitter, which seems to suggest that maybe deplatforming doesn't always work. AOC had, hailed the deplatforming of Tucker Carlson and suggested like that would be the end of your likelihood of interacting with him, which was obviously very, very, very premature. Tucker fully intends to remain part of the discourse. So we're going to talk about him, Elon Musk, Twitter, et cetera, in a minute. But first, his actual dispute with Fox. Fascinating. So he is alleging breach of contract for a variety of reasons. He says that, so his claim is that he's out as a result of the Dominion lawsuit. Fox, by the way, says that's not true, and Dominion, by the way, says that's not true. They've released a statement saying that was not part of their settlement. He also believes Fox made him look bad. He called out Murdoch specifically, violated the contract by making him look bad, which was part of their agreement that they would not, in the course of the lawsuit, do things, settle in a way that would be damaging to his own reputation. They clearly did that. That's what he's saying. So he's saying they broke the contract first. Yeah, so he now can post on Twitter. He can do what he wants because they have terminated the contract. Yeah,
and specifically, he's saying that because he was fired as a consequence of the Dominion settlement, that reflects wrongdoing on his part. That if he were fired for other reasons, then he can be fired for other reasons. But because he says that Fox fired him specifically as a consequence of the Dominion lawsuit, that the implication is that he did something wrong. And so the sum total, the consequences of this, if he were to be successful, is that he could continue to get the money that is remaining on his contract, which isn't up until January of 2025, at the same time that he continues to do news, do reporting, do journalism, or what have you, on other outlets, which you'd be precluded from doing in the alternative.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit unclear at this moment. I saw some reporting suggesting that he was essentially going to walk and not try to receive the money, but you're right that he wants to have this legal dispute with Fox about the state of the contract would suggest he's trying to still collect what could be, I think, about somewhere between $20 and $30 million based on what he's paid per year. So, which obviously he doesn't need the money, but of course that's a lot of money. Like no one says, I don't need $30 million. If you can get it, you can get it. He can, of course, also make millions on whatever platform he's choosing to engage in. It seems like it's going to be Twitter. But the fight, he wants to subpoena communications involving that Fox official, Irina Briganti, who's the head of Fox Media and is kind of a behind-the-scenes entity at Fox. Megyn Kelly has had some unkind words for that person with respect to her own departure from Fox. So I think Tucker wants to find out, or wants the public to find out, whether the leaks have been orchestrated, all of those kinds of things. I mean, to the extent he was undone by his own internal communications with other people at Fox, with his producer, etc. Maybe now this is like a little bit of payback, honestly. Yeah, I mean, what were other people saying? You think what I said was embarrassing? Here's what other people were saying.
Sure. I mean, it does feel as though the threat of embarrassing Fox is more significant than the possibility of him demonstrating that Fox has breached their contract. First, we have to know more about what these alleged material representations that were made to him were, and we have to find out if he can actually prove that some condition of the settlement with Dominion actually was firing Tucker Carlson. And I'm sure that his document discovery efforts here are aimed at finding exactly that out. It's not clear to me, maybe you know more about the role Irina would be playing in any of that, what, if anything, in her communications would help him prove his legal case, or if in the alternative, this is really about just exploding it all up and having the information available that would make it very embarrassing for Fox News to continue to hold on to their audience share.
Sure. He clearly wants to make this as painful, I think, for Fox as possible. His sudden firing and ouster was dropped on him, 2 weeks ago? So it's if they thought he was going to go quietly into that good night, I guess that was a very wrong bet. Yeah.
I mean, I also do think there's an interesting question about the exposure Tucker will get on Twitter versus the mainstream media. I do think it was very premature and hubristic for anyone to presume that someone as big as Tucker Carlson could be, quote unquote, deplatforming. We went through the same argument with Joe Rogan a couple of years ago when there was this question of, should Spotify offer him a deal? No, Spotify should deplatform him. Joe Rogan's someone who's independently built up the largest podcast following, one of the largest media followings, period, in the world. The idea that that following is reliant, ever was reliant, or would be reliant on being hosted by a company like Spotify sort of misses the point. If you think the institution, the corporation, shouldn't get behind someone for various ideological reasons, you're allowed to have that as your opinion. But this whole notion of deplatforming has gotten so skewed over the last few years. It used to mean that someone who otherwise wouldn't have an audience is being given an audience by usually mainstream cable media shows. This is what happened, I would argue, with Donald Trump in 2015, 2016, when shows like, or stations like MSNBC and CNN chose to air empty podiums and obsessively cover Donald Trump, and in fact fire reporters who didn't want to talk about Donald Trump. Melissa Harris Perry very famously was let go from MSNBC in part because she wanted to cover other kinds of news in the lead up to the 2016 election, and they were like, no, Trump is good for ratings, Trump all the time. That's platforming. That is exposing an audience that otherwise wouldn't be putting eyes on a figure to that figure disproportionately. But someone who already has one of the biggest audiences in cable media, it's a nonsensical argument. So the question is, are you now just creating a world where Tucker used to be in the fence, fenced in by Fox, have some kind of boundaries on him, boundaries which he's now saying in this video he's happy to take off. And
yeah, that's exactly what he's saying in this video.
And now he's out here without an editor. Right. Is that really a better world?
Well,
from the left, from the liberal perspective.
From a liberal perspective, almost no, certainly not. It might genuinely be a better arrangement for from the standpoint of addressing controversial subjects or things the regime doesn't want to talk about, particularly with respect to foreign policy. We're now hearing, it's still kind of operating the level of rumors, the discomfort that certain Republican leaders of a more old school neocon bent had with his hour on Fox News, specifically because he was charting such a drastically different course on Ukraine and et cetera. So,
and it's also worth noting that Tucker Carlson's chief writer, Blake Neff, was very famously fired some years ago because of bigoted statements that he was making on certain other online forums. Is that the kind of decision? Would Tucker Carlson's bigoted head writer be let go in a world where Fox wasn't putting that kind of pressure on. So it's not just, I know that there is a lot of interest in Tucker Carlson's kind of foreign policy takes and whether or not there was tension at Fox around those takes and whether or not he's free to be, continue criticizing the war in Ukraine and what have you. But there also is concern that some of his domestic policy, race takes, et cetera, also won't have any constraint on them in a way that might be harmful to various communities that have become targets of them, or frankly might be distasteful to his audience who also isn't that into some of the great replacement theory and other kinds of fringe rhetoric that have now in most recent history been connected to some of these mass shooters and the like.
Well, we're going to talk more about Tucker's future on Twitter in a minute. More Rising right after this.